Wow, and good day to everybody out there. This is Steve Ferreira, and I'm the host of Navigate B2B. Such an honor and pleasure to be here today on the FreightWaves airwaves. A little bit about me. I'm CEO of Ocean Audit, a major ocean freight global consultancy refund recovery firm specializing in servicing 17 of the Fortune 100. My clients range from retailers, wholesalers, freight forwarders all across the world. I'm in the process now writing two major books. Fortunate to have been signed recently with a big publisher. So we have those coming out in 2021, all about the navigating to your own B2B persona. So there's a lot on my plate. There's nothing better that I like than to bringing really, really interesting messages and content to you guys, because you guys are the power users out there, the gals and guys of the world looking to up your A game in B2B marketing, sales, and communication. And when we started Navigate B2B, everyone thought, well, geez, this is going to be just an ocean freight show. This is Steve, this is Mr. Ocean. Well, not really. Navigate B2B fits into the Navigate book lifestyle book series that I'm writing. By the way, the name's still out in the air. We'll probably take a read a poll. That would be kind of cool on what the book should be called. But the books are my passion. The books are a collection of 38 years of proven and tried methods in terms of how to up your A game in not only life and relationships, but also business to business and international transportation and logistics. And I'm learning all the time. And one of the reasons why I'm learning all the time is I've just met incredible, fantastic guests and professionals along the way that are decades younger than I, but have taught me everything I have had that have made a difference in the way that I conduct my business life, my personal life, and the way I articulate my messages out to the community. And it's funny, right? I had this class at Providence College where I went and graduated in 1982. It gives you a little bit of my age there, right? But my favorite class in the whole 4 years was this marketing class by this kind of hippie professor I had. And I got an A+ in the class. And I think half the semester was spent studying subliminal messaging. And back then, you guys probably don't recognize this. Some of you that are my age will. But, in magazines, billboards, but especially magazines, you'd have a lot of commercials for advertisements for alcohol or whatever, tobacco. And so there was always this concept of, okay, here's Madison Avenue is so clever with, visualization and planning messages. And, so here's this glass of ice and this beautiful, expensive, Johnny Walker or Chivas Regal is being poured into this glass. And supposedly the imaging is you're supposed to see, happiness and wealth and love and all this stuff in the glass of ice. So I'm looking for these subliminal messages, and my professor's like, do you see the guy on the yacht? Because he's drinking this, he'll have a yacht. And I don't know if anything was true about those messaging, but when I introduce my guest, we'll be sure to ask him that. So my guest has kind of been driving me crazy because ever since I met this guy, I've been talking about, do you guys remember the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? This movie is where alien ships come into this small town and they send messages to certain participants in the movie about where their camp is or where their base is. It's this huge, mountaintop in Utah. And so the aliens implant these messages into the actors, into the storyline, and the actors are drawing these visualizations of these clay models, and they can't stop drawing these models. They're sculpturing them in their mashed potatoes, in their kids' sandbox. They're carving them out of their lawn, and so they can't get these visuals out of their mind. And so I kind of feel like that because, in learning about visualization in business, we're so used to the text and the written word that this guy that I'm going to introduce you to today, and by the way, let's cue in my guest, Jack Butcher, CEO and founder of Visualize Value. Jack, welcome to the show.
Morning. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Hey, listen, am I wrong about these subliminal messaging? I mean, Jack's a 10-year Madison Avenue guy. I finally get a chance to ask you, is that a true thing or is that not true?
I mean, I would imagine 9 times out of 10 there is some implication that's some subtle implication that's meant to be there that's unwritten for sure.
So the hippie professor was spot on then, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Well, Jack, you know what? I love having you on today, and I got turned on to you from a friend, Jack Braun, who's runs a badass. It's called the Badass B2B Guide, and Josh is one of the best sales trainers, and he's become kind of my guru. And I think that one of the things that he's been on to that taught me a lot about you is being able to articulate a message that's almost like a text, but has kind of a hybrid of visualization and some words to it. So I know that you're a hot topic right now. You're a hot prospect. You have a couple hundred plus thousand followers on Twitter. So I want to welcome you to the show, and I'd like to cover some of the basics of Visualize Value, and then maybe get into some real specifics in what my audience is interested in the logistics and supply chain space. Does that sound good?
That's fantastic. Let's do it.
Oh, great. Well, I think the one thing my audience should know about you is that before Jack started Visualize Value, excuse me, he was doing these kind of services for people like Amex and Mercedes-Benz and McDonald's, and I think that one of the things that Jack, maybe like a frustrated entrepreneur, and sitting there carving out these campaigns for these incredible names in the industry, he wanted to articulate and really, I think, clarify, the value of these specialized businesses. And so I think Jack is also kind of a left brain, right brain person, and he came up with the idea of using visualizations to explain complex products. Jack, can you explain to the audience how you got involved in creating visualizations, and what was the aha moment where you knew that was something special?
Sure. So that whole process of working in the industry, there was definitely the application of that skill. So how do you take a concept that there's nothing physical that you can point at? So that might be a business model or a piece of software or a way of thinking that it doesn't have a product that you can sit on a desk and ask someone what they think of it. You have to figure out a way to make that visual. So that was a skill that I'd applied in the context of marketing and advertising to pitch clients. So this is how we're thinking about your business. This is where we see an opportunity for you to, launch something or better message against this thing you're launching. And that work never saw the light of day. That was really how we negotiated behind closed doors. So you'd have meetings with marketing directors, CMOs, etc., and say, here's how we're thinking about this problem. And that asset, that visual asset, would win you the work, but it was never what ended up in the market client facing, if that makes sense. So the insight really was, hang on, the deliverable that has more value is the thing that we're developing to win the work, not the thing that we're doing once we've won the work necessarily. So I discovered that I was irrationally passionate about and interested in was this process of visualizing these complex and invisible things. And 3 years ago, launched my own agency off the back of that insight originally, and was kind of doing a mix of the two. And after 6 months or so, I focused completely on this process of visualizing value and taking a complex, invisible idea and turning it into something visible that you can kind of show in a room and have everybody kind of nod in their heads and understanding what it is we're all talking about.
Well, Jack, are you a creative? Are you a marketer? Are you a salesperson, or do you feel that in the seat that you sit, you're all the above?
I think all of the above at this point. So I'm classically trained, as you might say, as a graphic designer, and then my first job was in a really tiny agency, so I kind of took on a bunch of things by default. So learn how to write, learn how to map out the strategy of a campaign, learn how to sell a campaign. So you can just kind of baptism of fire type situation. Just pick up these skills on the, in application.
Jack, it's interesting. I think visuals transcend language and culture, and I know that's something that you have a firm belief in. And when I look at, for example, I say to myself, well, gee, Steve, you have this great pitch deck, and you've got visuals in there. And then when I look at the visuals, it might be a circle, and inside the circle, it tells the viewer what it is. So is it real? It's not really a visual, right? It's a circle with a name in it. But I'm very interested in how you use visual symbols and how you think that they're almost more important, or we relate more to those than vocabulary. I think that would be an important place to start here for our audience. Let's talk about that. How do you see visual symbols as being more significant than vocabulary in, let's say, a specialized business?
Sure. So the process of, or, or the commonality that exists in our understanding of symbols, like you said, a circle or two circles overlapping, this idea of a Venn diagram that combines two elements, and then there's this central piece that indicates a different variable, or you have, everybody knows what an arrow is, right? It doesn't matter what language you speak, where you are physically. There are ways to represent data that everybody understands, regardless of what language they speak or the vocabulary they've developed. So there are these symbols that exist that we share a common understanding of. And I think, I'm not a biologist, but there are other kind of examples of this that have fascinated me over the years. Like, our ability to just process things visually is so much faster than looking at a wall of text and trying to extract meaning. So one of my favorite examples of this is a baseball fielder. So if someone hits a baseball, you're standing in the outfield, you know exactly where to run to, exactly where to wait for the ball to land in your mitt. So the thought being, you can process these things almost at a subconscious level, and trying to leverage that idea into how we present information in like a sales context, in a marketing context, really helps people make decisions faster, and obviously just have a common understanding. I think language, we sometimes pretend to understand something in a meeting when it's been spoken, versus having a diagram of this thing that you can follow the logic at a deeper level.
Well, I love what you said, and I was just thinking about the baseball analogy. I'm a big baseball fan too, right? And if you think of a big baseball stadium, and again, I'm a Red Sox fan, but I'll use first thing is a New York Yankee came to my mind, like Derek Jeter, right? So Yankee Stadium is packed. Derek Jeter, before he retired, he's at bat. It's a hot, it's the ninth inning, and all of a sudden he hits it, and it looks like it's going, right? And the crowd, and there's a lot of noise, right? And so it's really hard to kind of focus on it. And here's this really really one of a kind moment, right? That for the club or for baseball, and it's gone in a flash. But I think what you're saying, if I'm not mistaken, is there could even be a way to visualize that, the player, the ball, the flight, and you could see that, right, in a visual, and maybe take it in and make the moment last longer. Am I onto something in terms of how you're describing it?
Yeah, I think the observation that was presented to me in this context is, if you're waiting to catch a baseball, you don't need to understand the scientific process behind gravity, flight, physics. Like, you're not calculating the arc of the ball, the speed, whatever else. You're just getting yourself in position based on some evolutionary set of principles that you understand, where it's like, the ball got hit, it sounded like this. This is
Right.
the arc of flight. I'm going to be in the right place when it lands. So I think we have this ability to process visuals, or take visual signals and turn them into, help us make decisions faster than us reading a page of text. Like, if we were to describe Derek Jeter's, you have to excuse my baseball vocabulary, but Derek Jeter's ability to hit a baseball on a piece of paper versus like watch him hit a baseball, your understanding would be it would be far faster for you to grasp the concept if you just watched him do it. So I think that idea is really where you start to make strides in your communication, is if you can move from just describing something to showing something how it works.
And that is what I love about it because I think that one of the things in my industry in ocean freight, and I'll even go into logistics and transportation, but I think that guys, gals, salespeople, marketing people in my industry, maybe most industries too, because this is cutting edge stuff that you're bringing us. But talk a little bit about the brain's ability, right, to process these visuals, and being perhaps more superior to text. And if you don't use the visuals, you might be leaving out half of the story. And that kind of goes into that analogy that you've talked about, where it's what you see and what you say versus what they see and what they hear. You talk a little bit about maybe how we go from textual or an analog type, say, presentation to a visual one where the brain picks up the cues more adeptly.
Sure. The So in all text or all anything we're trying to describe with words, there are like relationships and semantic. There are these semantic relationships happening. This logic that underlies text. That I believe in almost every case there is a way to augment that and add additional context with visuals. So um, if you're describing, let's use a freight example, I'm sure an incredibly complex operation of how you're going to get a, a pallet of product from New Zealand to North America. Describing that process is going to take you, a few pages with a lot of detail. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but if that was augmented with a visual that starts to help you understand, you know, time frame, for example, we can use scale to say, okay, the first leg of the journey is 5 times longer than the second leg of the journey, for example. And your ability to process that, and you just look at that diagram, is going to quickly uh, help you come to an understanding that then, once you read the text, just increases the context you have rather than uh, reading the text and relying on your brain to kind of produce that visual subconsciously. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, and I think to paraphrase it as well in terms of kind of how I see that and I hear that is it's almost as if it's like the difference between how you describe something and then how you see that, and being able to visualize it and closing the gap. I think is where we want to move the ball forward with our with participants that would like to up their A game in communications. Is that do I have that
Yeah,
correct?
that's accurate. I would say yes.
And I think that when you look at it, right, it's like, okay, how do we articulate the value of to visualize value in a very specialized business? And I think that you said it really well in some of the areas that you cover is when you're building something and you're building something very specific and you're building something that's very different and better, as a company. Like, let's say I'm a freight forwarder or a trucking company, and so we're sitting down and we're building something great, we're building something better. I think to visualize the value of that, right, and using your techniques, it makes it almost impossible for that differential to be overlooked. What's your take on that?
I would agree. I think there's an arbitrage opportunity there in your communication. So uh, just by labeling yourself, you know, freight forwarder, let's say, whoever you're speaking to has uh, a definition of freight forwarder based on their experience, based on their relationships with existing freight forwarders. If you're starting a new business and you think about it differently, you have a more sophisticated way of providing that service. How do you differentiate yourself? How do you describe the difference that you've engineered in a very concise way? Because you have to overcome that, almost that's the stereotype that exists within the industry, that you have to label yourself in order to even bid on that contract. So the ability to visualize what your advantage is or how you think about this differently, to me, is a great arbitrage opportunity to just increase your value against those that you would be competing with for that same contract.
Yeah, and I think that for all of my viewers and listeners out there that are thinking about this and thinking, well, geez, I'm not a creative, I'm a marketer or I'm a salesperson. I'm not sure if I could, even come close to what these guys are saying using visuals. And like I said in my opener, I've been drafting up a storm. I've shared 10, 15 different examples, with Jack about, my business, Ocean Audit, right? And I'm not perfect. I mean, some of mine are a little hokey, but I'm getting the hang of it. And I think that's one of the really cool things about what Jack's done is he's put together a whole course about this and how to train, anyone from, the creative person or the marketing person or the entrepreneur or the salesperson to use some basics, and we'll talk about that. We'll see some really cool examples in a second, but I think Jack, would you hold that to be true, is that you don't have to be a creative Madison Avenue guy to start dabbling in visualization? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and it's a deeply rooted belief that a lot of people have, is like, I'm not creative or I'm not an artist, so I can't possibly visualize anything ever. And that's part of the wider mission, is to change that perception. Right? You don't Not everybody is a writer, but most people can write. I think there's this, especially with the tools that are now available at scale. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was kind of cost prohibitive, or you just didn't have access to the tools that could generate this stuff. But now those barriers don't exist anymore. So the way I like to think about it is, anybody can draw a diagram on a napkin or a whiteboard, and most people have used a diagram at some point in their life to illustrate a point. Um, so that's you just want to keep pushing into that behavior and convince people that they don't need to be, you don't need to have 3 years of, have an art degree or a design degree or anything else in order to start practicing this skill, because you're adding value to whatever discussions you're having, regardless of the aesthetic presentation of it a lot of the time. So
Right,
it's getting the
right.
logic down and making sure that what you're drawing is adding something to the conversations you're having. And if that's true, then you've won. And then obviously, like you said, it's just a process of iterating and upskilling and finding your taste. It's a lifelong pursuit. I look at stuff I've done after 15 years of experience. I'm like, man, I would have done that differently. And every year you look back, you're like, I can't believe I was so far behind a year ago.
Jack, I'll tell you, I've done like 3 or 4 examples, and I've done them over and over again, just to convey a message. Like I have one where it says, ocean imports are on fire, and then it's a graphic I did, a visualization, and then ocean imports are on fire, right? And ocean imports are on fire. And so it's like, every time I do it, it's like, I know now I know why you just don't say, here, use these visuals. It's really something that has to be organic. And I think that really jumps into the next topic. We have about 6 or 7 minutes left, and I want to kind of cover these. But I think one of the things is our industry in ocean logistics, supply chain does a crappy job in terms of it's all textual. We don't really articulate, or try to maybe make a productize a service, where, you can lay it out. And, in logistics supply chain industry, they move the world, and participants, we're just kind of lackadaisical in this space about how to, properly position our business. I know you did a little graphic on this for me. How might a transportation middleman convey value? I really like this particular graphic this visualization that you came up with. I'm sorry, I don't mean to call it a graphic, but I love this visualization. For I guess a 3PL, a 4PL. Can you give maybe a 40-second background in terms of what we're looking at and why is this significant?
Sure. So again, I'm not an expert in the subject matter here, but I work closely with someone who was. And the idea here is, how do you differentiate the depth and breadth of your services against the other um, participants in the market that describe themselves the same way you do on paper? So this visual is designed to present, a would-be client with the exceptionally comprehensive service that this particular firm offers, in contrast to everybody else who's calling themselves a 3PL. So I
Yeah,
think,
I love what you did, because you've kind of gone like a tier 3 is a 3PL that can do, every 3PL has kind of got this vanilla service. And I notice how you go tier 3, tier 2, tier 1, and you amplify the message of your client by having them be such a tier one provider. So in essence, this visualization is to show a client, well, here's a bunch of kind of vanilla noise out there, and then here's like the grand, pyramid of Egypt that you should be, this is the rocket ship you should be riding. Do I kind of have that direction in the how this might be perceived?
Absolutely right. And from everything I've heard, that's how it is perceived.
I loved it. I looked at it and I said, this is so different than kind of Jack has a color scheme where there's a lot of black background and white, visualization. And this is the mixed media approach I really like that I think companies will start to benefit from as they get more into Jack's concept of visualizing it. And I can see, where this could go out in a PDF or on a landing page. In other kind of comms that the salespeople and marketing people are trying to position the company to. And I think that, in my space, in Ocean, for example, right now the deck is really kind of stacked against, participants, right? Rates are kind of all over the place. Salespeople have to sell on rates. And I think there are three themes right now, we talked about in terms of what, like, let's say ocean vendors or salespeople can do to, maybe start to put together their 2021 plans, because 2020 has been very tumultuous with COVID. But let's talk about these next graphics as a series of three graphics in terms of maybe how we can go from chaos to controlled, domination. If we could put those graphics up, that would really be helpful. And I think that when I asked you to do this, I asked you to say, okay, I think on the right-hand side is kind of the chaos. And then, you use the quote from Deming, and there's an organizational process on the left-hand side. Can you maybe address this in 20 seconds or so, Jack?
Yeah, I think in the context of a productized service, this is a good example. So what your clients want to hear is like, this is exactly how we work. This is the organization of our IP. This happens, and this happens. This has a relationship to this versus that. So your ability to position yourself in that way is going to cut through the noise in the market that you're competing against, which would be.
Oh, that's great. And I think the next one also really, I think the next one really helps also kind of show the chaos of, let's say, the 2020 market, and starting to get your delineation of service value on the right-hand side. How would you view this one?
Yeah, I think this idea, I'm a huge Porsche fan, so this is where that comes from. This idea of anybody can change something, anybody can modify something, but to actually make tangible steps of improvement is very, very difficult.
And I think the last one was incredible. I love it so much. This is my favorite, kind of the process controls and the chaos on the left, focusing a little bit, and then amplifying as a 3PL or a transportation company or freight forwarder, the core values that you can provide on the right. I love this one probably the most of all. Address it, please, Jack.
Yeah, this is true in life, in business, in relationships, all of those good baselines. Everything you want to improve, more often than not, can be improved by cutting out these things that you're kind of half interested in, or you're half committed to, and doubling down on driving results in a couple of very focused areas. This has been true of a lot of examples I can recall in my life.
Well, I just love how that could be shown to a customer, and you have the significant value propositions that you want to build out. Right now in transportation, it's all over the place, right? There's 20, 30 things that everyone tries to be. But I think what you're showing in that last one is, hey, be 2 or 3 of those and get that value out and solve those pain points. And that's brilliant stuff. Jack, I got to tell you, I could eat this up all day. How do people find you? How do they learn more about Visualize Value?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Jack Butcher, Visualize Value on Twitter at Visualize Value, and visualizevalue.com. That's everything.
Wow, you've been an amazing guest. I hope it's been a good experience for you. I want to thank my whole audience for watching. You've been watching Jack Butcher, CEO and founder of Visualize Value. He's my awesome guest and new friend. And until next time, I can't wait to see you all again. We really love you, and thanks for watching Navigate B2B. You guys are the best.